Hi, Soundies. Welcome to this week's Sound for Video session. It's the 28th of July, 2024. It's good to have you all here. Let's hop on over to our agenda and see what we got going for today. So this is a workshop that goes along with our courses over at learnlightandsound.com, school.learnlightandsound.com. And if you would like to be notified ahead of time about these live streams and what we'll be covering, go ahead and you can sign up for free over at the school. And if you find a course there that looks like it would be of interest and useful to you, we'd love to have you sign up for that as well. Today, we're going to talk about Accentize dxRevive Pro, which is a speech restoration plugin. We actually covered this on my main channel probably sometime in 2023. I don't know if it's been almost a year ago. And they have updated it with some new processing algorithms, and we're going to take a listen to some of those today. Looks like it's improved a bit, so I'm excited about that. We do have a couple of questions that were submitted ahead of time, and we'll go take a look at those, and then we'll come back to the chat and check in with everybody there. So with that, let me just show you very quickly. Let's go over to our Mac here. What is, oh, that's really awkward. This little sign up is in the way, so we're going to see if we can make it smaller. There we go. That's a little easier to see. Earlier in July this month, Accentize introduced 3 new algorithms. Specifically, they have a new Studio 3 and Natural 2 algorithms, and they're essentially improvements. They've evidently been doing some tuning of those algorithms, and actually I can hear it. It actually sounds quite a bit better, and we'll take a listen to it here in just in a few moments here. But they also do have the older versions or the older algorithms, so you can always double check those and see if those work better. They also have this new one called EQ Restore, which is really cool. And we have a specific audio sample I put together for this that will allow us to kind of hear what that does. So with that, let's head on over to DaVinci Resolve, and here is the plugin itself. It's pretty simple, so you can basically power it on or off. You do have some presets here, and you can do a variety of different things here. We looked at these where you can apply it to different spectral bands if you want to. So for example, if you just want to affect the low frequencies, you can do that, or just the high frequencies, you can do that. We're going to go ahead and leave it right here at the default. Yeah, just leave it right here at the default. You have this one big knob to apply how much you want to apply this particular algorithm to the audio sample that you're applying it to. And it's basically from 0 to 100%. So it's very simple. So you can just click on the top of it and move your mouse up or down to change its value. It's pretty straightforward there. And then you can choose which algorithm you want to use down here in the left. Now I realize this is pretty small, probably on the live stream, especially for those of you watching on phones. So apologies for that. I don't know if there's a way to make it bigger or not. I don't think so. In any case, I can describe to you. So we have the studio algorithms here. And the idea with the studio algorithm is that it's supposed to not only clean up your audio, it's supposed to remove any reverb or manage reverb. It's also supposed to hopefully take care of any artifacts that are in the recording, but then it will also make the overall sound much more like a studio recording with a close microphone, quite a bit of bass, so on and so forth. What we're used to thinking of when we think of a studio recording. There's one called Retain, and that's mostly just about noise reduction and removing any artifacts. And you can just see, it'll tell you right here what each of the algorithms do. This is one of the originals. But there's the natural. And the idea with the natural is it's not going to necessarily give you that broadcasty studio sound, but it is supposed to do the noise reduction and de-reverb and take care of any artifacts itself. And then there's this new EQ Restore, which we'll take a listen to. Apologies, just 1 second, need to get a sip of water. All right, and the idea with the EQ Restore is that instead of it's not doing any noise reduction of any sort. Instead, what it's doing is taking a spoken word recording of any sort that seems to be particularly frequency limited. In other words, if you think of somebody calling on an old school telephone where it sounds very kind of mid-rangey and nasally, this is supposed to make it sound more full frequency, a little bit more natural, like real life. So we'll take a listen to that as well. But let's start with the Studio 3 here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it off as a start so that we can hear what this first sample sounds like. And this is Danny just doing some reading of Sherlock Holmes. This is what it sounds like with a plug-in
It was
off.
easier to know it than to explain.
Sorry about that. I need to explain. This is the plug-in off. No effect.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Okay. So poor Danny there. She's talking, reading, citing from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and in the background there's a fan. There are some fairly faint phone ringtones, and there are also some people walking around with sandals in the background. So pretty messy. Let's see what happens when we apply the plugin here. So let's try that again, and I'm going to go ahead and start at 50%. I'll move it around a little bit, maybe turn it off so I can just hear before and after, and we'll loop through it a few times. So here we go.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. So we ended up right around 50 in using my ear and what I would probably choose. What I did find is that when I pushed it to max, the great thing is it got rid of pretty much all the noise. The fan noise was gone. The ringtones were nearly imperceptible, and same with the footsteps in the background. However, what I did notice is that Danny's voice started to get this kind of harsh edge to it, especially in the higher frequencies. So that wasn't exactly desirable, but overall, really good results there on that first one. So again, I would probably end up somewhere around 50%. And curious to hear what you all think in the chat there. Let's move on to our next sample. This one is a little bit more extreme in terms of the noise in the background. So let's go ahead and turn the plugin off and let me play it through for you first once so you can hear where we're starting. Here we go. All right, and here's another recording. This time what we're going to do is have a variety of things going. We've got the fan, of course, but we also have some phone ringtones. And let's try a couple different. And this is going to give us a sense for how things go with while I'm talking, and there's also the tone. There are a bunch of different tones that we're going with here, just so that you can get a sense for how well this does at removing different tones. And let's go ahead and cut it there and see how voice isolation does with that. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and turn on dxRevive Pro, and we'll move things around and see where we get. All right, and here's another recording. This time what we're going to do is have a variety of things going. We've got the fan, of course, but we also have some phone ringtones. And let's try a couple different. And this is going to give us a sense for how things go with while I'm talking, and there's also the tone. There are a bunch of different tones that we're going with here, just so that you can get a sense for how well this does at removing different tones. And let's go ahead and cut it there and see how voice isolation does with that. All right, and here's another recording. This time what we're going to do is have a variety of things going. We've got the fan, of course, but we also have some phone ringtones. And let's try a couple different. And this is going to give us a sense for how things go with while I'm talking, and there's also the tone. There are a bunch of different tones that we're going with here, just so that you can get a sense for how well this does at removing different tones. And let's go ahead and cut it there and see how. Okay, I would say for me around 64, 65% seemed pretty good. It was, again, it was a trade-off. I felt like it started gating in between my phrases when I went much higher than that. Although, of course, when you went higher than that, it was better at getting rid of those. Especially, it took care of the fan noise pretty nicely, even at 64%. But when you started going higher than that, it could start to get also the ringtones more effectively. However, that's when it also started cutting into the dialogue, or at least getting that kind of heavy gating effect. In other words, the moment I stopped talking, you could hear it clamp down, which was not especially natural sounding. So, again, doing pretty well here. We're going to compare this to some others in just a few moments here. So, but that's a good start. That's a good start. Let's check in the chat here and see what people have to say in the chat so far. Nothing yet? Okay, it's very quiet in the chat today. All right, here is a fun one. This is the watch recording I made. And by watch, I mean I literally recorded this on a smartwatch in a kitchen. So there's lots of reverberation and also plenty of noise from a refrigerator compressor running and things like that. So this is where this one starts. Oops, let me just select that. Yep, we got it selected, and here we go. Well, this is just a quick recording here to test. I'm recording actually on my watch. I'm in the kitchen area, so there's some reverberation. There's a refrigerator running, and the microphone is not close to me. So let's see how this sounds when we bring it through dxRevive. Hopefully it'll probably sound a little thin, but let's see what we get. Okay, so that's where we're starting. And let me just select that. There we go. Okay. Okay, so let's start with the studio, and then let's go to natural, and then let's try also the EQ restore. But here's the studio first. Here we go. Well, this is just a quick recording here to test. I'm recording actually on my watch. I'm in the kitchen area, so there's some reverberation. There's a refrigerator running, and the microphone is not close to me. So let's see how this sounds when we bring it through dxRevive. Hopefully it'll probably sound a little thin, but let's see what we get. Okay, I'm going to call that one off right now. That one sounds pretty awful. It's hacking things up more than it's helping. It does add a good bit more, I guess, weight to my voice, and it sounds a little bit more full frequency, but it is doing some really heavy gating it's trying to manage all the noise and reverb and other stuff at the same time. So that's probably a no-go. We can try the natural. Let's see how that goes. Well, this is just a quick recording here to test. I'm recording actually on my watch. I'm in the kitchen area, so there's some reverberation. There's a refrigerator running, and the microphone is not close to me. So let's see how this sounds when we bring it through dxRevive. Hopefully it'll probably sound a little thin, but let's see what we get. Well, this is just a quick recording here to test. Okay, so that's a little better in terms of it's not hacking my voice up quite as much. It's taking care of a little bit of the reverb and some of the noise, so that's something. But my voice is still sounding very, very thin. So let's hop on over to this new one, EQ Restore, and see what it does. So we'll start at the start. Start with it off. Here we go. Well, this is just a quick recording here to test. I'm recording actually on my watch. I'm in the kitchen area, so there's some reverberation. There's a refrigerator running, and the microphone is not close to me. So let's see how this sounds when we bring it through dxRevive. Hopefully it'll probably sound a little thin, but let's see what we get. Well, this is just a quick recording here to test. I'm recording actually on my watch. I'm in the kitchen area, so there's some reverberation. There's a refrigerator running, and the microphone is not close to me. So let's see how this sounds when we bring it through dxRevive. Hopefully it'll probably sound a little thin, but let's see what we get. Well, this is just a quick recording here to test. I'm recording actually on my watch. I'm in the kitchen area, so there's some reverberation. There's a refrigerator running, and the microphone is not close to me. So let's see how this sounds when we bring it through dxRevive. Okay, interesting. What's interesting about this one is that one of the things that this particular algorithm is attempting to achieve is to restore some of the frequencies that seem to be missing from the recording. And it's actually doing a pretty good job. That sounds like my voice. It's not doing any work to clean up any reverb or noise or anything like that. But at the same time, when it does the EQ for the voice, one thing that you could do this manually with an EQ, except that when you do that, you're also going to be boosting all of those same frequencies for the noise. And what this plugin and this algorithm in particular are attempting to do is to boost the frequencies that seem to be missing from your voice without also overemphasizing those frequencies for the noise. So it is still having to figure out, okay, what's noise, what's voice, and apply corrective EQ to the parts which are voice and not to the parts which are noise. So it has to still figure out what's the difference between the two. But that one actually does a pretty decent job. Yeah, it's still noisy. Yeah, there's still reverb. But overall, I might find if I were working on documentary film, I would probably use this one. And at least do a round of the EQ restore first, and then maybe come back to do some denoising after that. So that was kind of fun. All right, let's go back to the Studio 3 algorithm for now. We have our next one here. Actually, let's do a reverb sample. So this is Danny in an extraordinarily reverberant stairwell. And let me turn off this plug-in here at the start. Let's go ahead and we're going to select just this track. Let me did I turn the plug-in off? Yeah, plug-in's off. Here's what it sounds like from the start.
This morning I baked a loaf of bread. Apparently, even though I wasn't baking a turkey this year, I still am used to getting up early and cooking something. I haven't baked a loaf of bread for probably, I'm not even sure how many years, but I wanted to make sure I used the jar of yeast that I saw.
Okay, you get the idea there. Plenty of reverb. And let's go ahead and use the Studio 3 algorithm, see where we get.
This morning I baked a loaf of bread. Apparently, even though I wasn't baking a turkey this year, I still am used to getting up early and cooking something. I haven't baked a loaf of bread for probably, I'm not even sure how many years, but I wanted to make sure I used the jar of yeast that I sought out last year in 2020 before it goes bad. So we'll see how this loaf of bread turns out. I baked it quite a long time with a water bath, and I think it'll be all right. So that's what I did this morning. Got up.
Okay. This, I would say, is probably the best de-reverb that I've experienced, I think, this far. This has done a pretty nice job. It's not perfect. We're getting a little bit of that muffle sounding, but even up at 70%, it's sounding pretty decent. I might back off just a little bit, depending on what I'm doing, but this is actually doing pretty well. It's doing better than a lot of the other de-reverbs, certainly the RX de-reverbs that I've used before. So this one's doing a really, really nice job. Let's see how it does with other things like a hum. So if I come back down here to this over here, we have a really kind of a complex hum that's going on, plus some dialogue. Let's turn off the plugin and let you hear what it sounds like from the start.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact.
Okay, let's see what happens with the Studio 3.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact.
Okay. Subjective assessment there. Pretty good. Not perfect when you push the higher percentages. You could definitely start to hear some gating. So the hum would kind of come back for a moment and then disappear. So that's not perfect. I would actually say that RX, actually we can try RX's dehum. It actually has the ability to manage these pretty nicely. So this one did pretty well though. For an overall speech restoration plugin, this one did surprisingly well on this. All right, so that's where we're starting. Let's take a pause here and check into the chat and see what's going on in the chat before we move on here. I feel like hearing an unnatural emphasis on the last syllable of Danny's words in the dxRevive example. That's fair, yeah. I will say that a lot of the other dxRevive plugins that I've used before and heard, they often start to sound, instead of having that emphasis on the last syllable, what they tend to do is they tend to have this sort of, oh, you meant on the last consonant. Got it. Okay. They have a different artifact that they tend to introduce, which is this sort of muffled, pillowy, like talking into a pillow sound is how I often describe it. And it starts to sound pretty unnatural in a different way. This one, to me, if you don't push it too hard, I think it sounds a bit more natural than that when you push the other ones really hard. But yeah, it's not perfect. None of these are perfect, but it does seem like a little bit of a step forward. $259, do you have a discount code? I don't. By the way, plus strange downside, iLock. Okay, let me talk about a couple things. Number one, in full disclosure, Accentize gave me this license when I reviewed it back in September. I fulfilled my commitment to them by making that video review all that time ago. I was just curious, so I came back because I heard they release these new algorithms. So I have no agreement with them in terms of, I've never had agreement with them in terms of what I had to say. They have never told me that, but I have complete freedom to say what I want to say. So yeah, it's not cheap. And this is for, again, this is for professional use. If you're earning money from your dialogue post-production work, that's where something like this makes sense. If you're just doing passion projects, that price tag may be a little bit steep for what you're trying to achieve. So just putting it in context there. Same with RX, unless you use the Elements version, which has just, I think, 3 plugins, maybe 4 plugins. These are pricey tools, and they're made for professionals that are earning money from their living, but from processing audio. Okay. I have the non-pro version and have found it worked well on some recordings that neither Waves Clarity or Supertones Goyo fix, but of course, not a magic wand. Completely agree. These all have their strengths and weaknesses, and we're seeing them kind of take little steps forward. They're kind of leapfrogging each other in sometimes. So we're seeing lots of little things, lots of little advancements. And what I would generally find is, I think if you have someone who's working in post-production and sound, they probably have several of these tools. and use whichever one, they probably experiment with each one to see which one works best on a particular clip and then use that one. So unfortunately, it doesn't feel like there's a really clear, this one is the best all the time. There's a lot of movement right now in this area. This is where you're seeing, I think, a lot more innovation. As for Daniela's comment about iLock, iLock is an app or a physical USB dongle that you use on your computer to authorize plugins. The problem with plugins historically, and I'm not here to say that I support it one way or the other, but a lot of people pirated plugins for a long, long time. And so the plugin manufacturers tried to find a way to make it so that you could actually certify that you have a license to use it. And iLock is one way to do that. Is it ideal? Some people hate it. I've had some problems with the app running from time to time, but overall it works okay for me. So that's where we're at. I do not have one of the physical USB dongles. Those cost, I think, $80 or something, and that way you can take your licenses with you from one computer to another computer without having to deactivate it on one computer and reactivate it on another. You can actually license it to your physical iLock USB device and then move that from computer to computer. At least that's the theory. I've just used the app on my computer because I'm doing almost all my processing on the same computer. So that's the background on that. Worked on stomach growls. Nothing else touches. Really happy to hear that. That's one that I haven't tested yet, so thank you for confirming that one. The old maxim still works. Garbage in, garbage out. Translated to audio, bad audio in, equal bad audio out, LOL. It's true. You still need to work on getting your audio clean from the start. Tokyo Sword. Oh, hey, I finally caught one of these live. Just wanted to drop by and say thanks for all the great content. I learned a lot from you as a newbie. Hope you have a good day, Curtis. Thank you, Tokyo Sword. Great to have you here. Brian says, just got here and heard about strong gating, and I've been having problems on knowing how to gate and compress an audio just to get rid of mic noise appropriately. Well, in this context, we were not, what we're using, what I was describing there is how this speech restoration plugin, dxRevive Pro, if you push it too hard, starts to make this very obvious gating sound to it. What I mean by that is that the second I stop talking, it's very clear it cuts it off. It's almost like you can feel the knife cutting the waveform right there. So it's not necessarily the best thing in the world. And using gates, they use gates, for example, some on when you're recording drums, for example. A lot of times they'll use, those that are mixing music will use gates on the drums because you have a series of drums all within the same vicinity on a kit. They have mics on each drum, and they want to be able to make sure that when they're recording Tom 2, it's not also recording the decay of Tom 1 that they just hit, that the drummer just hit prior to that. So they use gates to gate out the different drums and kind of get this more isolated sound. It's a very specific sound as well too. You can hear it. The first the first band that comes to mind where I remember hearing a lot of it was Green Day back in the day. Very, very gated, highly gated drums where they almost started to sound very electronic to me. So in any case, that was the context, at least, Brian, for why we were talking about gating there. All right, anything else? Okay, let's go, and we're doing okay on time. What I want to do is I want to pull up Dialogue Isolate and just see how that compares here. So I'm going to turn off dxRevive, and let's see if we've got Dialogue Isolate here. Okay, I think Dialogue Isolate you actually have to do in RX. So let's get the one right here. So we'll select this track here, and I'm going to send it over to RX. And here it is in RX. All right, let's use Dialogue Isolate and see what we get. All right, and here's another recording. This time what we're going to do is have a variety of things going. We've got the fan, of course, but we also have some phone ringtones. And let's try a couple different. And this is going to give us a sense for how things go with, while I'm talking, and there's also the tone. There are a bunch of different tones that we're going with here, just so that you can get a sense for how well this does at removing different tones. And let's go ahead and cut it there and see how voice isolation does with that. All right, and here's another recording. This time what we're going to do is have a variety of things going. We've got the fan, of course, but we also have some phone ringtones. And let's try a couple different. And this is going to give us a sense for how things go with, while I'm talking, and there's also the tone. There are a bunch of different tones that we're going with here, just so that you can get a sense for how well. All right, and here's another recording. This time what we're going to do is have a variety of things going. We've got the fan, of course, but we also have some phone ringtones. And let's try a couple different. And this is going to give us a sense for how things go with, while I'm talking, and there's. Okay, let's talk about this one. What I'm hearing, and maybe tell me what you're hearing on your end as well. I get the raw audio experience here with just a digital to analog converter straight out to headphones. So I'm probably I have an unfair advantage over all of you. So you're hearing it sent to YouTube and then put into a lossy format. But what I'm hearing is that while Dialog Isolate can remove a lot of the noise, even when you're using a fairly mild noise reduction setting, maybe just even -12, it starts to make my dialogue sound really, really harsh. So I felt like I would have to do some cleanup of that. I might bring out Soothe 2 or something else after I applied this to get it sounding similar. On dxRevive, it seemed like I was able to get to where I needed to pretty quickly. So right around 50% seemed like it was reducing a good bit of the noise. Not all of it, certainly not the ringtones, but it was doing a pretty good job with the fan and reducing the prominence of the ringtones while not affecting my voice, and not, at least not as much, and not making it sound really, really harsh. So that's what I was hearing on my end. I'm curious to hear on your end what you were hearing as well. So that's just one example comparing that to Dialog Isolate on RX. Let's see what you all say. In the meantime, let's go answer a couple questions that were submitted ahead of time. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to those. Let's bring up our agenda here. And our first question is from Johan, and Johan says, is it possible to test a COS 11, referring to the Sanken COS 11D lavalier microphone, and a WLav Pro side by side into a Theos transmitter at shouting volume? I'm getting distortion in my WLav Pro and Theos combo in loud scenes without peaking on the transmitter input gain. Wondering if it's the WLav Pro and if a more expensive mic will fix it. Well, Johan, I actually did some testing. Let's go ahead and have a listen to that. So I'm going to come on over here to RX, and let's go to a couple of recordings I made. So let's start with this one here. So these were both made on, this first one, it was made with a WLav Pro into a Deity Theos transmitter. That was transmitted wirelessly to the receiver, and then that was recorded with the Sound Devices Mix Pre 3. So that's our signal chain. I had the gain set to, I believe, 18 dB. So I had to leave plenty of headroom here because, again, the wireless transmission is not 32-bit float. It's converted back to analog once it gets to the receiver. So if it did exceed 0 dB, it would clip there. But this is what I have here. Hey, just checking to see if this is clipping. Check 1, 2. So technically, it does not appear to be clipping. There's a little bit of sounding definitely saturated, and that's one thing. So that's the WLav Pro. Here is another sample. Let me just turn that off here. Here's a sample with the same wireless setup, but in this case, we're using the Sanken COS 11D lavalier mic. Checking 1, 2, 3. Hey, there we go. We're Topping out around minus 12 on the mix pre. Checking 1, 2, 3. Also, technically not clipping, although I also watched, it didn't look like we hit the limiter on the mix pre, so I think this is probably happening in, it's not technically distorting, but we are seeing some, or I'm hearing a little bit of saturation on both of them, actually, to be 100% honest. And with the wireless transmission, remember when we came back and took a look at Theos a while back, and we noticed this kind of shelf here? It almost looks like it has some sort of adaptive compression that the wireless system is doing, such that it allows these transients through, but as soon as the transients subside, it's doing something compression-wise. It's almost like it's saying, hey, there's no information here. We don't need to worry about it, so we can compress the heck out of this, save ourselves some bandwidth for the wireless transmission, is my guess as to what it's doing. So technically, I don't know if that's close, Johan, to what you were experiencing, but again, yeah, it was loud. Yeah, it was starting to sound saturated on both microphones to my ears. Technically, it didn't look like it was a hard clip, but if there's more information you have, or if I didn't test it the same way that you were experiencing that issue, let me know. I'm curious there. So if I had to guess, I think there may be, well, we're dealing with lavalier microphones, first of all, so that's part of the challenge. Their ability to handle high sound pressure levels is generally not as great as larger diaphragm mics. So that's the first thing. Second, if you are recording a lot of shouting scenes, one thing you might consider is getting a professional grade microphone that's made specifically for musical and opera, for musicals in particular. So they have lower sensitivity versions, and those are going to be able to handle those higher sound pressure levels better. So you might have something like that in the kit if you're working professionally and you're finding yourselves filming scenes where there's a lot of shouting. So there's some thoughts there. Hopefully that helps a little bit. Next question is from Grant C. regarding what we were just looking at here, dxRevive. I own Waves Clarity VX Pro and dReverb Pro licenses. Does it make any sense for me to switch to Accentize's dxRevive Pro, or at least purchase it and compare? Grant, I would say there's a trial version. I would get the trial version and compare it on your own audio samples just to see how it works for you, if it's getting better results for you. So those are my thoughts there. Definitely try the trial. There's a trial version, so they give you, I think, a week or so to at least take a listen to it and make sure it's going to fit your needs. So I would definitely recommend that. All right, let's go back to the chat and see what we have going on in the chat today. Jazz says, I've ordered the Deity PR2. Price per features and included lav mic is very good. Yes, for those that missed it, over on my main channel, we just released a review of the Deity PR2, which is essentially, well, one way you could think of it, it's a pocket recorder with a lavalier microphone. Some people, and I originally thought of it as basically a Deity Theos without the wireless. So it's just a pocket recorder, 32-bit float if you're recording mono, 24-bit linear if you record stereo, which is kind of an interesting feature as well. It's a little bit different than the Theos. It's a plastic build instead of a metal build, but overall I've been pretty impressed with it. Works pretty nicely. If you're doing a lot of things like that and you don't, investing in a wireless system is a lot more expensive. So you could get a PR2, the pocket recorder, for $239 versus a Theos, which is a lot more expensive than that, closer to $1,000. Or you could even get two of the pocket recorders for $460 versus a full Theos kit for $1,100 or $1,200 for the same, for 2 channels. So anyway, pretty good kit. Danny, I messed up levels and one channel on the track E was recorded solo. I can't boost it enough to match in my nonlinear editor. The audio is good, just low level. Will this tool help, or do you have any tutorial? This could help because you're going to get a lot of self noise when you boost it a lot. So that's going to be just the self noise generated by the wireless system itself. And also you'll have the dialogue, presumably, as I assume what you're talking about, Danny, will be sitting much closer to the ambient noise. And so you'll need to kind of clean that up. This is one option there. Again, there's a trial version. You could try it out without committing to a big price tag. I love how Curtis always tells us the signal chain. Very few ever tell you the signal chain. Speaking of signal changes, signal chains. Today we're on the back to the Earthworks ethos, to the Mackie DLZ creator. That's going line out to the Canon C200 camera here. That gets at that point it's all digitized, and then it goes to the A10 Mini, and then out to the Pearl Nano to get sent to YouTube. So, thanks for the reminder, Matt, too. Fachiri, I was just recording an extremely dynamic scene solo while boom operating. Does anyone know if the mix pre can record safety tracks in 24-bit? Surprisingly, my wireless boom was hitting the limiter and compressing, but the WLAV Pro and Theos wasn't. Kind of interesting. It might have been the MKE2, but interesting either way. Let's go back to that first one, Danny, if that's okay. Safety tracks, I don't believe it does, as far as I remember. Don't remember that feature in the mix pre ever. Could be wrong on that, but I assume, Fachiri, you're on an original mix pre, so you don't have the 32-bit float? Yeah, depends on that. And then what was the second one? Wireless boom was hitting the limiter. So which wireless system were you using, Fachiri, on that? Curious on that. That could be a... Is that this one? Well, the MKE2 is the lavalier mic. Anyway, yeah, we just need to know a few more bits of information to make a kind of educated guess as to what's going on there. Lav and motorsport never go together. I learned from trying. Motorsport's extraordinarily loud, anywhere near the action, anywhere even at a safe distance from the action. Yeah, it's a tough combination there, for sure. DaVinci Girl, by the way, DaVinci Resolve have extremely security risk and bugs special for audio use. I assume you're warning us that we should be very careful with DaVinci Resolve right now. There's some sort of security risk. And I assume that's in the beta 19, the latest beta 19 version you're speaking to specifically. If you could confirm that, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you. Two-part.
But it's two different people.
Two different people. Phil Collins sounds are happy gate accidents. There are some funny stories about Phil Collins and him trying to replicate what his sound engineer used. Phil in the studio wanted to do it himself. Incidentally, Phil Collins did record on Fairlights back in the day, back when they were big hardware early digital 80s and early 90s consoles. So I know that for sure, but it sounds like he was trying to play around with using effects in a way that they weren't originally intended to get a special kind of new sound. Just like we use the pitch correction like crazy in music since about, 2007, when Cher first recorded that song, where they used the pitch correction as an effect as opposed to a way to correct the singing. Chris, which algorithm did you use for dxRevive in that phone ringtone example? That is a great question. Come on back over to DaVinci Resolve with us. Chris, that was the EQ restore algorithm is the one we used there. And that did a pretty extraordinary job. Didn't remove the noise. I think that's the idea, is that it doesn't mess with the noise or the reverb. Instead, it just looks to make the dialogue sound more full. So you'd still be, once you applied that, then you'd want to go back, and if you did need to do some noise reduction, you'd apply it from there. That one was pretty cool. DaVinci Girl says, not just version 19. Audio is highly dependent on glib, and Blackmagic did not upgrade the glib like recommended since 2019. Okay, so for context, what that means, there's a library, I believe it's an open source library called glib, and Blackmagic Resolve evidently uses it, and they haven't upgraded to a newer version since 2019 when they found these security issues in it. So just something to be aware of. Thanks for sharing there. Okay, 2 parts. We switched to 32-bit float, but the editor would have preferred 24-bit with safety. The wireless boom was an SLX D35. Okay. The editor was on location, so we were trying to get out of recording 32-bit. But c'est la vie, I guess. LOL. Yeah, it's funny that they're still particular about that because well, I guess it was the video editor. I don't know which app they're using to edit their video. If they're planning to do the mix in the editing app, the video editing app, then maybe. But pretty much all of the major DAWs support 32-bit float at this point. So I'm with you. C'est la vie. Better pull out the declipper, sadly. By the way, the RX declipper is pretty good if they're looking for one. Which incidentally might have been more expensive than trying to bring things in 32-bit float, lowering them, exporting them, and then bringing it into the edit. But yeah, c'est la vie. My studio, I visit blew the motherboard on the, I assume you're talking about the Neve Black. Had to replace the entire motherboard. Lucky it was under warranty. They called me since I was an IT guy once to replace it. Oh my goodness. Imagine that was not inexpensive thing. And yes, thankfully it was under warranty. I wonder how they blew it. Wow. I will say, and speaking of reliability and equipment, just to share a couple of things, there are some people of the opinion that if you, in our studio at work, for example, if you have a studio, just leave the equipment on all the time. And I don't think that's such a great idea. We actually had one of our cameras failed on us. It was a Canon C70. It was on solid for several years, probably 3 years, and it just one day just stopped working. It is important to understand that with electronics, they heat up, and when they heat up, the solder joints can change over time. So my personal take is I don't generally leave things on 24/7. There's not a need to, first of all. Even from an energy consumption standpoint, it's not a great thing. In fact, if I just take a look right now. We're drawing 2 amps right now for this whole live stream setup. That doesn't include the lights. So what, 120 volts times 2, basically 240 watts is what we're drawing right now for the computer, the mixer, the camera, the streaming switcher, the second computer, the chat, the headphone amp, and the monitor, and the teleprompter. So I don't know. I turn them off. It's an interesting story you share there too, Matt. I don't know how you all feel about it, but I find if you're not going to be doing something with that equipment for 24 hours, and shut it off. For the moment, if you can, use different programs. There exists a special exploit against DaVinci Resolve, or use it on a PC without internet connection. There's an option you can turn off your internet. Is it a 0-day DaVinci Girl? In other words, have people exploited it in the real world, or is it a theoretical exploit at this point? When I first used I don't know how you pronounce Antares Autotune in the mid-2000s, that's when I learned how to Cher made her sound. Yes, exactly. Autotune, and what's the other one called? I don't use it. So Melodyne. Yeah, Melodyne is the other one, the main one. So you'd be surprised at how many tracks that's used on for vocalists, for singers. A lot is the answer. All right, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Tag them at Curtis Judd Audio. Happy to take a look at those. Johan, if you're here, I'd love to hear more about the Theos and those 2 different mics. Want to let us know about that? Happy to take a closer look at that at some point. All right, Mark says, I just upgraded to dxRevive Pro and was able to activate it with a license key. No iLock needed in my case. Oh, that's great to know. Good, so you don't have to use iLock, it sounds like. For those that do not like iLock, there's an option there. Studio doesn't know it's a Windows machine, so I have it isolated on an enterprise firewall to protect it from all the stuff on an unfiltered internet. Yes, that's a good thing. Good thing there. Hi, everyone. What's the difference between DaVinci Resolve 19 versus 19 beta? I believe it is still in beta. I don't believe there's a version that's not beta yet. So I believe they're on beta 5 or something like that now. So it's 19 beta version 5, something like that. Does it tell you? Here it says version 19.08 build 50. I believe this is the latest beta version. So there isn't, it's not out of beta yet, I guess is the short version. So as soon as it's out of beta, then you can go to the full version 19. Oh no, Daniela has lost a lot of money. I hope you can get that sorted soon. That's
I think that's the DaVinci Resolve bug that she's talking about.
Oh, okay. I'm very sorry to hear that. And I hope there's a way to recover some of that. That's everything in the chat. Okay. All right. Let's talk about some other things then for a minute here. As far as sound goes, recent projects. We are in the process of working on our studio at work. We're in a rented space in San Francisco, and we're on the second, our studio is situated on the second floor of an old brick building. It's a beautiful building inside. It's a 3-story building, so our business occupies the second and third floors. And the downstairs neighbor is a retail shop. And I won't mention any names, but it's a retail shop. And they play music, and a lot of the original building is still there. It's a brick building with just a wood floor, and there's very little insulation between the first floor and the second floor. So one of the challenges we've experienced a lot over the years is we've attempted, with the limited height that we have to work with, to isolate the sound downstairs, upstairs. And so we're now working with an acoustics engineering firm to find a way to provide a little bit more isolation. So normally during their business hours, they're running music. They've got a speaker attached to the ceiling right underneath our studio. And so the acoustics engineer is working on ways to address that. And one of the things they identified is putting a sound barrier, so essentially something like this, mount that between the speaker and the ceiling, and then also put an isolating mount for that speaker so that it doesn't vibrate the actual flooring itself. So that's one thing. And then another thing is building up the floor and, again, adding high density material that will help absorb some of that. So do they play Green Day? They do play music very much like Green Day. I wouldn't be surprised if they played Green Day at least once or twice. Okay, and Fachiri says, can we get a petition to get the Sound Devices 8 Series SD Remote app to work with the MixPre? By all means, get one spun up, and we'll see what they say. The SD Remote app, for those that are not familiar, the Wingman app works with the MixPre. It's very limited. There's very few things you can do with it. You can start and stop recordings. You can give the tracks names, if I'm not mistaken, so you can enter some metadata. Not a lot beyond that. So you can't change settings for individual channels or anything like that. On the Sound Devices SD Remote app, you can actually control a lot more than that. So you can go in and change all of the settings on an individual channel, for example, so on and so forth. So it's a very different experience on the 8 series versus the MixPre if you're using the app, just to give you context. All right, I have a MixPre 6.2 and 4 EWDP connected. Those are the Sennheiser wireless digital systems. Should I select line for them or mic input? Oh, it's a good question. I don't remember. I think you can set the output on the EWDP to line level. And in that case, you'd want to set line input on your MixPre. So check the manual to be 100% certain. But that's the big question for the EWDP, is whether it supports line level output. I don't remember off the top of my head. Sennheiser EWDP manual is what I'm searching for. There's a quick guide. Let's see. No, the quick guide I don't think is going to be detailed enough. Whoops. You also might check in the app. I don't have one on hand, unfortunately, to check for you. But I would get into the user manual and check to see on the output levels is what you're looking for, and see if that can be switched to line level. That would be the first thing I'd check. Oh, Mark has a correction here. Oh my, I was wrong. Even with the activation code, I still had to log into iLock. Sad eyes. So yeah, it looks like iLock is required. I know mine is licensed via iLock as well.
Okay, here's 2.
2, Robert Harker. On Linux, you can solve the glib problem by removing the resolve glib libraries. Resolve then uses the system glib, which if you have patched your system, cd, this is the command you can use to actually make sure that you have the latest, it looks like. Very good, Robert. Thank you. Got some good command line stuff going on there. So you'll find that in the chat if you need to get that exact information from Robert. Thanks, Robert. We'll watch your DDPR2 straight after. Thank you, Curtis Crew. I just fired up DaVinci, and it's updating to version 19 beta 5. Yeah, looks like that is the latest version. Thanks, Jazz, for confirming. Danny is scouring the chat.
I don't know what this is referring to.
Oh, I think Matt is talking here about acoustic treatment. So they got some new stuff with that's extremely thin with amazing results. This is at MIT. It's something like 1/8 of an inch thick, and it's not available yet. So there's definitely some research going on in terms of acoustic treatment materials. There's some that are probably doing just purely mechanical. There's also one I heard of, which basically like a film that you apply to the the flat surfaces in your room, and it's actually doing something electronic to when the sound waves actually hit it, to, I believe, essentially invert the phase, provide a waveform of the inverted phase. So it's essentially eliminating that wave as it hits the wall. But none of this is all research. None of it's actually commercially available just yet. But yeah, they're doing some interesting things there. So instead of having, these back here, these are 6 inches thick, these are 4 inches thick. Instead of having all that and very bulky and large, imposing sort of acoustic treatment, they're looking for ways to do it more effectively without taking up all that space. We'll see. It's interesting though. Thanks. Still have my MixPre 10.2 and Shure TL48. Worth it. That's a great combination. Glad you love it, and glad it's working well for you. Resolve now has AI voice isolation. Yes, we tested that on a live stream a while back. It does a pretty decent job. Decent. My sense was that dxRevive was a little bit better. All right, so we're just about at time. Thank you all for joining us today on our Sound for Video session. I hope that you have a fantastic week. Get out there, make some great sound, and we'll talk to you again really soon. Take care, everybody.